My wife came home from her business trip with kiss marks on her neck, and the moment I saw it, my entire body froze. There was no immediate anger. It was a deep, dense silence, as if the world had held its breath around me. My gaze remained fixed on those marks as if they were open scars on my soul, and she, upon noticing my expression, stopped. She tried to cover it with her hair, with the collar of her blouse, with silence. But her silence screamed. And when I asked what that was, she didn't answer. He just looked away, and in that second I knew, the love had been buried right there, in the living room, among the still open suitcases and the airport perfume that still hung in the air. I filed for divorce immediately. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "It's over." She didn't react. Maybe because I knew I deserved it, maybe because I was in shock, or maybe because he had already said goodbye to me long before, and that moment was just the last chapter of a novel that only I thought was still being written. This wasn't just a betrayal of the body. It was soulful. From memory. Of everything we've built over the years. Every hug before bed, every laugh at breakfast, every plan made for the future, everything had been emptied by the taste of another man on her skin. From then on, everything became a contaminated memory. The romantic dinners turned into theater scenes where I was the only one who believed in the plot. Her passionate messages now sounded like cruel ironies, and her tender touches like lies disguised as affection. The head spins, the heart weighs heavy, and the only question that constantly pounds is, why? Why destroy something that took so long to build? Why not be honest? Why let everything fall apart for an adventure? Is a passing caress worth more than a life together? I was overcome by a feeling of ridiculousness. Because, in the days leading up to the betrayal, I was planning a surprise for her. Flowers, wine, a trip. I was rediscovering myself in love. Just when she gave herself to someone else. It was as if I was watering a plant that was already dead. And the cruelest thing was that, while I put more warmth and love into what we had, she returned coldness and indifference, but with a smile on her face. The same smile with which she must have kissed him, with which she must have undressed for him. A smile I loved, now disgusted me. When I left home, my head was a minefield of memories. I went straight to her company. Something inside me wanted to see. I wanted to know if he was someone I knew. And there, between muffled laughter and averted glances, the truth emerged, hard and raw. The lover was her boss. A man I greeted once when we went to the company's year-end dinner. Who complimented my jacket. Who toasted us. And here he was, now, taking from me what I valued most. My house. My emotional security. The woman I loved. But the universe, silent and precise, observed everything. And what I didn't know yet was that that same man had a history. A past hidden beneath the facade of a respected executive. The truth is that he had a habit of seducing employees, manipulating them, promising promotions, and then throwing them away. And she, blinded by the attention, fell into the same trap. He thought he was special. She thought he would give up everything for her. Didn't let go. When the scandal came to light, the entire company knew about it. He was removed. But not before dragging her into the abyss with him. She lost her job, the respect of her colleagues, and the reputation built with years of effort fell apart like wet paper. And me? I got back up. I used my pain as fuel. I transformed the grief of betrayal into impulse. I calmly remade my life. And it was precisely when I stopped looking that I found someone. Someone who didn't carry secrets in their eyes. Who said, "I love you," with truth, not as a habit. Someone who looked at my scars and didn't back down. It was left. But the past has long hands. It doesn't disappear. It creeps through the cracks of memory and reappears at the most unexpected moments. And it was on an ordinary night, months later, that I heard a noise at the gate. It was her. Destroyed. Wrinkled clothes, smudged makeup, red eyes. She asked for forgiveness. He said he didn't know what he was doing. That the other man abandoned her, that her friends disappeared, that her family judged her. That only I really knew her. And then he asked the question that echoes to this day, is there still a chance? Silence was my answer. Not for lack of words, but for an excess of memories. And there, looking at the shadow of what she once was, I understood that forgiveness may even exist, but trust dies with the first kiss given to another skin. And even after everything, there was still one last thing she didn't tell me. One detail. A little secret that would change everything. Something that she has hidden since the beginning of the trip, that he used to manipulate her and that now, about to be revealed, threatens to change the game again. Because not all cheating is just about desire. Sometimes it's about power, about control, about a story that was never just about two, but about many. What did this man know about her? What did he use to transform her? What is she afraid I'll find out today? Because the truth, this burned and silent one, is still lurking. And when it comes to light, maybe she won't be the one who loses everything, maybe the biggest price is yet to be paid. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of cheating is romanticized or supported. All stories are fictional, but they carry profound truths. The betrayal destroys homes, hearts and futures. Our purpose is to show, without filters, the real price of breaking the trust of those who love us. Now, take a deep breath. Get ready. You're about to hear a shocking story, the kind that leaves a mark forever. For years, Ethan and Clara were seen as the perfect couple. Friends, co-workers and even strangers watched them with silent admiration, like someone contemplating a classic painting in a gallery, a harmonious portrait of complicity, stability and affection. They met in the most unlikely setting possible, a boring corporate conference on a gray Tuesday morning. He was analytical, methodical, systems engineer, she is communicative, articulate, project manager for a multinational. He saw the world as something to be organized, solved by formulas and logic. She, as something to be felt, interpreted and reinvented. And it was precisely in this difference that the strongest bond between them was born. Ethan found in her the color his organized life was missing, and Clara saw in him the stability she never knew she needed. In the beginning, everything was new and light, the messages exchanged between meetings, the impromptu dinners after long days of work, the silent walks hand in hand on cloudy Sundays. Every detail was recorded in memory as a small achievement. The first kiss with the taste of white wine and shyness, the first, "I love you," whispered between nervous laughter, the first trip to Tuscany, where he almost got lost driving in the countryside and she cried laughing for hours. The relationship grew consistently, without unnecessary drama, fueled by mutual trust and respect built with small daily gestures. After 2 years, Ethan proposed to Clara in the middle of an old bridge, under the light rain of a dormant spring. She said yes before he even finished the sentence, and there began the construction of a life together that, for many, seemed impenetrable to time. They bought a cozy house on the outskirts of the city, with large windows and a garden that Clara insisted on taking care of personally, even on the busiest days. He, always concerned with details, transformed the basement into a reading and music room, where he spent hours listening to jazz and writing down his ideas for future projects. She, on the other hand, divided her days between intense work and dedication to her home, taking care of each environment as if she were shaping the nest where her emotions lived. Their home was full of life, colorful pictures hanging on the walls, stacks of books in the corners of the room, the constant smell of fresh coffee, and romantic movie soundtracks playing in the background on lazy Friday nights. Even with their intense routine, they never let their love grow cold. Clara had a habit of writing notes and leaving them on the bathroom mirror, little phrases like, "You make me better," or, "Today I dreamed about you before I woke up." Ethan, more restrained in words, demonstrated it with actions. He washed the dishes so she could rest, prepared her favorite tea on nights when she arrived late, played soft music before she went to sleep. It wasn't a fairy tale marriage, there were difficult days, silly arguments, uncomfortable silence, but there was, above all, the mutual choice to stay. And perhaps that was what enchanted the people around them so much, the way they seemed to choose themselves every day, even when the world seemed to want to drag them away. The work was demanding for both of them. Clara, especially, was constantly on the move, traveling to other cities on business, participating in strategic meetings, often returning only on weekends. Ethan, although he missed it, was always understanding. He trusted her completely, was proud of her professional growth, thrilled with her achievements and celebrated each new promotion as if it were his own. There were nights when he ate dinner alone, looking at the empty place at the table, but he never complained. Her return was enough and everything was back on track. That's how they worked. At least, that's how he believed they worked. Over time, Clara started to get involved in larger projects. He took on the leadership of a new international team, and that meant even more travel, even more distance. The suitcases were always half-packed, her perfume spread across the clothes hanging in the room, the high heels lined up at the entrance of the house as little reminders that, even though she was absent, she still belonged to that home. Ethan became increasingly lonely, but found comfort in routine. He woke up early, ran around the park, prepared his own coffee, reviewed reports and fed the orange cat that Clara had impulsively adopted on a rainy Saturday. On the weekends when she was home, everything became lighter. They made pancakes together, watched their favorite movies, planned vacations that always ended up being postponed due to some new unpostponable meeting. Ethan believed their love was resilient. That life, no matter how turbulent it was, would never destroy something so well-founded. When friends complained about the ups and downs of his marriage, he smiled with a certain silent pride, as if he knew a secret that others didn't. For him, the secret was simple: dialogue, patience and commitment. Clara, although more reserved with her friends about the intimacy of the relationship, always showed affection for Ethan. She touched his shoulder tenderly when he spoke in public, looked at him with admiration, laughed at his jokes even when she already knew them by heart. She said he was her base, her point of peace. And he believed. Because, in her eyes, I still saw the sparkle of their first encounters, even if sometimes that sparkle seemed further away than before. In recent months, something has started to change in subtle ways. Clara seemed more scattered, more tired. He arrived late, with lame excuses about extended meetings and delayed flights. He started using his cell phone more frequently, locking the screen quickly when he approached. Ethan noticed, but preferred not to comment. I believed it was the stress, the pressure of new projects. He tried to ease the burden, massaged his tense shoulders, prepared long baths with aromatic salts. I wanted to be her refuge. I wanted to keep that intact. I was still making plans, thinking about having children, buying a bigger house, planting a tree in the garden for each year of marriage. I thought there was still so much to build, little did I know that I was already walking on invisible rubble. Outside, the world remained immune. Dinners with friends still took place, with laughter and wine served in fine glasses. Parents still sent messages asking when they would come visit. Neighbors still praised the organization of the garden. And Ethan still believed that everything was where it should be. He was too methodical to imagine anything being out of place without being immediately noticed. But some chasms opened slowly. First a short distance, then a prolonged silence. A harsh response here, an absence of looking there. Small cracks that, when ignored, become irreparable. The wedding anniversary was approaching. 5 years. Ethan planned a weekend at a mountain cabin, surrounded by snow and silence. He booked months in advance, prepared a playlist with her favorite songs, wrote a letter by hand, the kind that people don't write anymore. Clara said she couldn't go. Appointments. An important event. He was sorry, kissed him on the forehead, said they would make up for lost time at the next opportunity. He smiled and nodded. He put the letter in a drawer and told himself that she needed to understand how much she was loved. He still had time to show it. There was still time to save what they had built. But time is merciless to the naive. And Ethan, even though he was so attentive to everything, had no idea that he was just a few steps away from seeing his world turn to ashes. And perhaps what destroyed him most was not the act itself, but the fact that he had loved someone so passionately who, little by little, had stopped loving him as before. And of everything he didn't yet know, a painful truth was already forming in the shadows, waiting for the exact moment to surface and forever change the course of what he believed to be unbreakable. Clara embarked on that work trip with the same naturalness as always, as if she was just going to fulfill another obligation on the corporate agenda. She kissed Ethan as she left the house with a quick smile, threw her suitcase in the trunk of the company car and left without looking back. He stood at the door, watching the car disappear around the corner with a strange feeling tightening his chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't distrust. It was just an intuition, quickly drowned out by the reason that always accompanied him like a shield. Her absence in the following days was filled with spaced, short messages, full of professional jargon. Busy day, love, I have an early meeting tomorrow, I love you, I'm exhausted. Ethan didn't suspect anything. He knew her work rhythm, he knew the intensity of her commitments, and even though he missed a longer call, he chose to trust. He got busy with his own projects, immersed himself in reading, planned improvements to the house, thought about painting his room and even started writing a short story that had been in the drawer for years. It fed the mind so as not to leave the heart empty. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Clara was immersed in a parallel routine. The hotel he stayed in was elegant, with large glass windows and a privileged view of the city. Meetings took up a large part of the time, but there were always dinners offered by the executives, evening get-togethers, and invitations for drinks after the presentations. She refused some, accepted others, always remained friendly and smiling, maintaining the impeccable image that got her promoted so many times. It was on one of these nights, after a praised presentation and some toasts of white wine, that he approached. One of the partners of the partner company, recently divorced, older, confident, one of those who know exactly how to behave in front of an intelligent woman. The type of man who looks you in the eye firmly and gives compliments precisely, without seeming vulgar. Clara resisted at first, kept her distance, mentioned her husband naturally, but the subtle game had already begun. She felt it, and didn't interrupt. Over the next few days, he got even closer. Smiles in the corridors, discreet jokes during meetings, compliments disguised as technical observations. When the group decided to dine out, he made sure Clara was next to him at the table. He paid for her glass of wine without asking, commented on the perfume she wore, lightly touched her hand when toasting. She, wrapped in tension and tiredness, let herself be carried away by the warmth of that well-measured attention. He didn't respond to the provocations, but he didn't run away from them either. And at that moment, without realizing it, he began to build the abyss. On the last night of the trip, with the project completed and the contract submitted, Clara was alone in the hotel restaurant. I was tired, thoughtful, torn between professional satisfaction and a restlessness that I couldn't name. He appeared again. He sat down opposite her, ordered 2 glasses, chatted about light topics, commented on his own life, on his teenage daughter whom he had barely seen, on the loneliness of the end of a long marriage. Clara listened carefully, tilting her face to the side as she did when she wanted to show empathy. When they stood up, he held her hand gently, and she, instead of retreating, remained. They went to the elevator together. And there, in the sultry silence of the journey, he kissed her. A slow, safe kiss, full of intentions. She didn't push him away. The next morning, Ethan picked her up at the airport with flowers in his hands. Clara smiled, hugged him tight, let his scent fill her with guilt. She tried to hide it, talked about the trip, about the challenges of the week, about how tired she was. He listened to her carefully, driving slowly, stroking his hand over the gearshift. At home, he prepared coffee, talked about a book he had read, showed a drawing he had made of the garden. She listened to everything with downcast eyes, and that night, when they made love, she cried in silence with her face turned into the pillow. Ethan didn't notice. He thought it was tiredness. He thought she was sensitive, as she sometimes was when she returned from long trips. But inside her, the guilt was already dragging like an icy current, corroding the spaces that previously belonged only to love. In the following days, Clara returned to her routine. He always kept his cell phone nearby, answered discreet messages, and smiled when he received photos of company events sent by that man. Ethan, although involved in his activities, began to notice absences. Her look, distant. The touch, more mechanical. At night, it took longer to sleep. I spent more time outside the house. Once, he arrived home early from work and found her sitting in the living room, staring into space with a glass of wine in her hand. She smiled in surprise, stood up too quickly, almost dropping the glass. He said he was thinking about life. He believed. I always chose to believe. Because I didn't want to doubt the woman with whom I shared my life, my dreams, my future plans. I didn't want to be the one who suspects, who spies, who accuses. He wanted to preserve the image he had of her, of the woman he chose to love and respect until the end. But the end doesn't let you know when it arrives. He just gets closer, step by step, until he invades the space without asking permission. Confirmation, however, came in a cruel way. On the Friday of the second week after returning from the trip, Clara was preparing to leave for a supposed last-minute meeting. She dressed more carefully than usual, applied makeup precisely, perfumed herself with a scent Ethan didn't recognize. He watched her from the hallway, in silence. I felt tightness in my chest, as if something was out of place. She asked if she wanted him to take her. She declined with a hasty smile, saying she was taking a taxi, which was more practical. Once she left, Ethan stood still for a few minutes. Something inside him was awakening, but it still had no name. So he decided to open her nightstand drawer. It wasn't like him. But instinct won. She found new lipstick, an earring she didn't remember seeing, and a business card. A name. A number. A company. He spent the night awake. The next day, he called that company and asked to speak to the name printed on the card. The male voice answered, confidently. Ethan pretended to be a customer. I wanted to know details about a service. The man was cordial, friendly, even too much. Ethan hung up and fell silent. Something was confirmed in the subtext. In the way he smiled on the phone. In the familiarity with which he spoke about Clara without knowing who was on the other end of the line. On Sunday, Clara came home late, with a different smell on her skin and a strange glow in her eyes. Ethan hugged her, kissed her forehead, and said he missed her. She hesitated before answering. That night, when they slept side by side, he was awake for hours. And that was when, lying there, feeling the heat of her body so close and yet so far away, he decided he needed to know the truth. On Monday, he left work early. Passed by her company. He spoke to the receptionist, pretended to have an appointment scheduled. Waited. And that was when he saw the two of them going down the elevator together, laughing, talking with an intimacy that went beyond professional limits. The man touched her shoulder, and she returned a light smile. And then, like someone who was already used to the gesture, he leaned over and left a quick kiss on the corner of her neck before walking away. Ethan stood still. The blood ran cold. Time seemed to slow down. Clara didn't see him. She was distracted, enveloped in a happiness he no longer recognized. He walked away before she noticed him, walking to the car like someone carrying the weight of a collapsed world. He drove in silence, without crying. The pain was too deep for tears. When he got home, he didn't wait. He packed his bags, wrote a short note and left it on the living room table. When Clara arrived and saw the bags and paper, she froze. He took the note with shaking hands. In it, just one sentence, I saw it. She tried to call, to chase him, but he was already gone. No shouting, no fighting, no explanations. Just a silence that said more than any words. There was still a lot Ethan didn't know. The betrayal was just the surface. What was hidden behind her was still about to be revealed. And that, yes, had the power to destroy not only what was left of the marriage, but also the image that Clara had built of herself throughout her life. Ethan spent the next few days away from everything. He avoided friends, turned off his cell phone, temporarily abandoned work and isolated himself in a small country house inherited from his grandfather, a place he hadn't visited in years. He needed silence to think, to listen to himself, to understand where everything started to fall apart and at what moment he stopped being a husband and became just a spectator of his own life. I slept little, ate even less. I walked around, heard the wood creaking in the early hours of the morning and felt, for the first time in a long time, the weight of being truly alone. In the dark room, the images of betrayal came back in painful flashes, the touch on her shoulder, the hidden smile, the kiss on her neck. Ethan had left the house with a broken heart and a numb soul, but there was something else that disturbed him, something he still couldn't explain. It was as if that betrayal was just part of an even bigger puzzle, as if there was a hidden chapter being whispered between Clara's gestures, between the silences she had cultivated so carefully in recent months. It was then that he decided to return. Not to get back together, not to forgive. But why did I need to understand? I couldn't sleep anymore without having the complete truth. He was a man of logic, and betrayal alone didn't seem enough to justify her recent behavior, the sudden distancing, the sudden coldness that came even before the trip. Something was eating him up inside, as if he was still being deceived even after the end. He drove for hours in silence until he arrived back in the city. He stopped in front of the house where he had lived through the best and worst moments of recent years and observed the lights on, the curtains moving in the wind. He took a deep breath and entered. Clara was sitting on the sofa with a book on her lap, but she wasn't reading. When she saw him enter, she jumped up, her eyes wide, her breathing hitched. She called his name, as if he could still be hers, as if the simple act of uttering the sound she loved so much was enough to erase everything she had done. He didn't respond. He just walked to the armchair in front of her and sat down. He asked her to tell the truth. Not about what I already knew. This she did not need to repeat. He wanted to know what else had been hidden. And then Clara sat down too, slowly, as if she knew she was about to bare her soul in front of someone who no longer loved her. She looked at him with deep-set eyes, marked by sleepless nights, and asked if he was ready. Ethan just nodded, firmly, without hesitation. She started with a low voice, as if she was telling something forbidden. He said that months before the trip, he began to feel that he was losing space in the company, that important decisions were being made without his participation. She felt threatened, disposable. A new project was about to be launched, an international merger between competing companies, and her name was not among those nominated to lead it. That was when the new partner appeared, promising to open doors in exchange for proximity. At first, she refused. I said no. But he was insistent. He began to involve her emotionally, to study her weaknesses. I knew she valued recognition more than anything else. And then he made the cruelest move. He revealed that he knew something from Clara's past that could ruin her image inside and outside the company. Ethan frowned, confused. She took a deep breath and started to cry. He said that he had hidden something from him since the beginning of the relationship, something that he never had the courage to tell, not even in the most intimate moments. Years ago, long before meeting Ethan, Clara had had a brief relationship with one of the founders of the company where she worked. A relationship kept secret, full of imbalances and manipulations. When he decided to end it, the man didn't accept it. He started persecuting, threatening, making it difficult for him to stay on the team. She resisted for a while, but when she realized that her reputation was at stake, she decided to record conversations, meetings. And with that, he managed to negotiate a promotion in exchange for silence. The case was hushed up, and the founder was removed under the pretext of early retirement. Nobody knew the real reason. Except her, and now, that new partner. Ethan listened silently. stomach tight, breathing heavy. Clara then revealed that, upon realizing that the new man knew everything, she fell into despair. He promised that he would help her achieve the position she wanted, that he would protect her, that he would make sure the past remained buried, but in return, he wanted more than company. I wanted physical, emotional involvement. He wanted total power over her. At first, she resisted, but he threatened to reopen the scandal and send the old audios to the directors of the new administration. And then, trapped by the fear of losing everything, she gave in. Gave in once. Then another. And finally, she no longer knew if she was being blackmailed or if she had completely let herself get involved. She said there was no more control, that she felt like a prisoner of her own past. Ethan interrupted her, his voice firm, without shouting. He wanted to know why she never told him. Why, even when he asked her to share her anguish, she chose silence. Clara replied with teary eyes that she was ashamed. That she couldn't stand the idea of him looking at her with contempt. That she would rather he loved her in ignorance than judge her in truth. He said he was afraid of losing him. That's why, when the new partner came back into her life as a threat, she preferred to deal with everything alone, even if it meant destroying herself inside. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out for long seconds. The weight of the revelation crushed him. He felt betrayed not just as a husband, but as a partner, as a confidant. Clara had made choices alone, ignored his presence, his love, the ability he always had to protect her. By hiding everything, she removed him from the role of companion and turned him into a disposable piece, as if he wasn't worthy of carrying that burden with her. Ethan turned slowly, his eyes hard. He said he didn't know which was worse, the physical betrayal or the lack of trust. He said the most painful thing was knowing that, in all that time, she hadn't considered him strong enough to share the burden. That what destroyed them was not the kiss on the neck, but the decision to face it alone. Clara fell into tears, kneeling in the middle of the room, repeating between sobs that she never stopped loving him. That everything he did was out of fear. That she still loved him. But Ethan didn't respond. It was sold out. Love, even if it does not disappear from one day to the next, does not survive omission, a profound breach of trust. He walked to the door, looked back one last time and said that he now understood everything. He understood why she returned with distant eyes, why her hugs seemed empty, why she trembled when she slept next to him in the last few weeks. He said he was sorry, not for himself, but for her. Because he had built everything for the two of them, but she had chosen to live everything alone, without him. And left. Not with anger, but with the cold certainty that, in that moment, something had died forever. Something that neither time, nor explanations, nor tears would be able to resurrect. Clara remained there, alone, on the cold living room floor, embracing her own despair. The truth had been told. But not every truth liberates. Some simply bury us once and for all. Ethan didn't come home that night or the next. He left no address, number, or any means of contact. He temporarily moved to an apartment rented through a colleague at work, in a more isolated part of the city, where no one knew him, where he could walk the streets without being confronted by the looks of neighbors, without the risk of bumping into faces that belonged to his old life. I spent my days between repetitive tasks, tepid meetings and solitary trips to the supermarket, as if the automated routine were a slow and necessary anesthetic. But at night, the silence was still a living, overwhelming presence. The weight of the revelation had not dissipated, only changed form. He no longer felt anger, but an unnameable emptiness, as if his story had been uprooted with no chance of being replanted. Clara's gestures, her lowered eyes, her trembling voice as she confessed everything, echoed in her mind, not like memories, but like ruins. What hurt now was no longer the betrayal, but the dimension of everything that was omitted, built on a minefield of half-truths. He had completely loved someone who never had the courage to show himself completely. Meanwhile, Clara tried to rebuild the rubble inside the house that was once full of life. The rooms seemed bigger, empty, and his absence was almost physical. He tried to occupy his time with household chores, reorganizing closets, throwing away old papers, trying to erase traces that only reinforced his loneliness. I called Ethan almost every day, but he didn't answer. He sent long messages, some pleading, others silent, containing only the phrase, "Listen to me, please." Nothing came back. Mutual friends began to move away, not knowing how to deal with the story, and the few who were still looking for her, looked at her with eyes full of judgment. At work, rumors began to circulate. The partner involved in the scandal had temporarily disappeared from the company's headquarters after being pressured by internal directors. Clara was removed from the international project under the argument of team restructuring. I understood the subtext. The castle was collapsing from all directions. Professional, personal, emotional. And now, alone, she understood what it was really like to lose someone. Ethan wasn't just a husband. It was his north. And without him, all she was left with was a sense of guilt that consumed her with the same voracity as an out-of-control fire. 2 weeks after their last conversation, Clara decided to look for him in person. I knew from acquaintances that he had not left the city. She got the information on the address of her new apartment from one of his co-workers who, reluctantly, felt sorry for her when he saw her crying. When he arrived at the building, he hesitated at the door. I felt my heart racing, my hands cold, my body as if I were about to face a trial. It hit. 3 times. Without strength, but firmly. Ethan opened it shortly after, with an expression of restrained surprise. He wasn't expecting her, but he also didn't seem surprised enough to kick her out right away. They looked at each other for a few long seconds, until she, unable to contain herself, said that she needed to speak. He didn't respond, just stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The apartment was simple, functional, without decoration, like a space that had not yet been truly inhabited. Clara sat on the sofa while Ethan remained standing near the window. She began by saying that she wasn't there to ask for forgiveness again, because she knew he couldn't offer it as things were. He said he wasn't trying to justify anything, but that there was something that needed to be said. Something that perhaps he didn't want to hear, but that she could no longer carry alone. Ethan, in silence, just nodded with a slight nod. Clara took a deep breath and said that, since his departure, she had received an unexpected proposal from another company. A vacancy at a competing multinational, in another country, far from everything, a chance to start over. She hesitated before accepting. He still hadn't given an answer. She said she considered leaving not to escape, but because everything here suffocated her. The looks, the judgments, the empty house. But I didn't want to make that decision without looking at him one last time. Without saying, face to face, what I really felt. Then, with a choked but firm voice, Clara confessed that she had never felt as small as she had in recent weeks. Even though the betrayal was a monstrous mistake, and she did not seek to exempt herself from her guilt, the omission of the past was, for her, a form of protection. She said she was afraid of not being loved when she showed her scars, her old mistakes, her less virtuous side. Who grew up hearing that women need to be perfect, untouchable, and who only now understood that hiding her flaws turned her into a fake, not because she wanted to deceive Ethan, but because she feared losing him. Ethan listened silently. Eyes down, hands clasped. When she finished, he looked at her. He said he understood, but that understanding was not the same as forgetting. That the pain didn't disappear with good intentions or well-chosen words. He said she was a coward, yes, but not just towards him, towards herself. Who spent years pretending that everything was fine, when an honest conversation was enough. He said that maybe if she had trusted him sooner, things would have been different. But now, it was too late. Clara got up and walked towards him. He said he knew there was no more space for the two of them like before, but he couldn't leave without saying thank you. Thank you for everything he was, for everything he built with her, even without knowing that one day it would collapse. She said that, despite everything, he was the best chapter of her life. And that, as contradictory as it seemed, she still loved him deeply. Ethan didn't cry. But his eyes were wet. He didn't respond right away. He touched her face, one last time, with his fingertips. And he said he loved her too. Intensely. But love, alone, does not rebuild burned bridges. He said there was no regret. Just a deep tiredness. A need to move forward. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. He said he would accept the proposal. That I needed to try to breathe somewhere else. He said he didn't know if he would ever return. But if he came back, he would be a different person. A better, more whole, more honest version of yourself. And then she was gone. This time without suitcase, without promises, without requests. Just one last look. And Ethan stood there, alone, looking out the window. He felt something different inside him. It wasn't peace, but maybe it was the beginning of it. Something had been closed. A complete, painful, but necessary cycle. For the first time in weeks, he slept through the night. And he dreamed not of the past, but of something new. Something that I still didn't know what it was, but that, for the first time, wasn't accompanied by pain. Just silence. And a strange feeling of freedom. The following days were marked by a silence that no longer hurt in the same way. Ethan began to rediscover the sound of his own breathing, the sound of the kettle on the stove, the distant noise of the city on gray mornings. There was a strange serenity in the emptiness that previously crushed him, as if his soul had gone through a storm that did not destroy him, but forced him to start over with other eyes, other hands, another heart. There was no longer the impulse to seek explanations, nor the desire to hear anything else that Clara had to say. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be faced, was faced. And even though complete forgiveness was still unattainable, there was no more hate. What was left was a bitter understanding about the limits of love and how, sometimes, loving someone is not enough to save them, or to save yourself alongside them. At work, Ethan resumed his duties steadily. Double concentration, focus on new projects, objective conversations. Clara's absence was a topic avoided by everyone, like a wound that no one had the courage to touch. Gradually, colleagues stopped asking about the wedding. The pain had turned into noise, and the rumor, into oblivion. However, in the midst of this recreated normality, an unexpected figure emerged, Isadora. Young, but with a maturity that was noticeable in the way he spoke and listened. He was a manager at a partner technology company who began working together with Ethan's team on a new system that would be implemented in the coming months. Their professional meetings, initially formal, began to become lighter over time. They exchanged ideas, laughed at observations about the chaos in the sector, shared coffee and discreet jokes in the corridors of meetings. Isadora was not invasive, she did not show explicit interest, but her presence was so sincere and calm that it became impossible not to notice. Ethan, at first, resisted the idea of any emotional bond. He had built solid walls around himself, and he still observed the world through the cracked windows of distrust. But Isadora didn't try to force any entry. She was just there, like someone who understands that presence is worth more than words. On a rainy afternoon, at the end of a long meeting, she invited him to have a coffee outside the office. He hesitated for a moment, but ended up accepting. They sat in a small cafe, hidden between tall buildings, and talked there as if time had bent on them. Isadora spoke about her professional frustrations, about a childhood marked by losses, about the constant feeling of being rowing against invisible tides. Ethan, touched by her honesty, shared snippets of his story, not naming names, not going into details, but allowing her to see the scars. And, for the first time in a long time, he felt understood without having to explain himself. That night, returning home, Ethan didn't feel guilty. He did not feel that he was betraying the memory of a past love. On the contrary, he felt that he was, little by little, burying something that no longer deserved to be carried. Clara's figure began to fade away, not as a memory, but as an attachment. It was as if, finally, I had stopped trying to understand why everything was noisy and had just started accepting it. Pain, when named, has the decency of becoming less unbearable. And that's what he felt, silent relief as he realized he no longer needed to fix what was broken. All we had to do was move forward, along paths that were still being built. Meanwhile, Clara was organizing a move to another country. The new company had made the proposal official and offered a leadership position. It would be a fresh start, far from everything, with the possibility of rebuilding your professional and, perhaps, personal identity. He sold part of his furniture, said goodbye to neighbors, closed accounts and packed up memories with a coolness that he had learned to cultivate. I avoided spending too much time in each room of the house, so as not to be overwhelmed by the memory of what once was. I avoided listening to the music they listened to together, I avoided the restaurants, the paths, the smells. But there was one thing she couldn't shake, the faint hope that Ethan would still show up, still say something, anything, before the plane left. The day before the trip, she left a letter under the door of the apartment where she knew he was staying. He didn't beg for anything, he didn't ask for a fresh start. Just thank you. For everything. For the simple mornings, for the conversations over coffee, for the times he held her when she was falling apart and didn't even know it. He said that, no matter how much he made mistakes, he never stopped loving. And I hoped, one day, to be able to meet him again with different eyes, with another soul. Ethan read the letter in silence, sitting in the same armchair where he had let her in weeks before. He folded the paper carefully, put it in the drawer and, for the first time, smiled when he remembered her, not with sadness, but with a certain distant affection. It was a closed chapter, yes. But not with hate. With humanity. On the morning of boarding, Clara looked out the plane window as the engines gained strength. Her heart felt restless, as if something still held her there, as if a part of her was anchored in a life she didn't want to leave. He closed his eyes and allowed himself one last memory of Ethan. The discreet smile, the way she organized the sofa cushions, the attentive look when she talked too much. He kept that in a safe corner of his memory and took a deep breath. It was time to go. Ethan, in turn, was walking through the park with Isadora on a Saturday morning. They talked about banal things, series, politics, food, and sometimes, they just walked in silence. And in that silence, Ethan realized something. That starting over didn't mean erasing what happened, but learning to live with the marks. That moving forward was not about replacing, but about rediscovering. And that loving, again, even in fear, was the greatest act of courage anyone could have. Life, no matter how much it insists on falling apart, always finds an opening to flourish again. And sometimes that gap is called someone who just listens. No rush, no promises. Just listen. At the end of that afternoon, as the sun hid between the trees, Ethan no longer thought about what he had lost, but about what he could still build. And, as he looked at Isadora laughing at something he barely remembered saying, he knew that, for the first time in a long time, the future no longer scared him. Months had passed since Clara left. The city seemed smaller, more contained, as if it shared the introspection of those who stayed. Ethan didn't look for her anymore, nor did he receive direct news from her. I learned from third parties that he had established himself well in the new country, taken on leadership of a strategic area in a large company, and that his name was beginning to circulate again in the corporate world, this time with respect and without the shadow of scandals. Still, no matter how successful she was becoming, there was one detail that no one knew about. At night, after the emails were finished, the meetings were finished and the presentations were impeccable, Clara remained silent on the balcony of her new apartment, observing a city she didn't know and which, despite being welcoming, didn't really embrace her. It was as if his soul had been suspended in time, divided between the present and a past that still throbbed. He had everything he ever wanted professionally, but none of his achievements were celebrated with enthusiasm. Congratulations arrived, toasts too, but there was a gap between the clinking of glasses and the echo of his own consciousness. The regret, even if silent, was constant. The feeling that he lost something he could never get back, not by punishment, but by choice. She knew that, even if one day she returned, Ethan would no longer be where she left him. And that was the hardest weight to carry, having let go of someone who would have stayed if she had only had the courage to tell the truth at the right time. Ethan, contrary to what he himself would have predicted, not only survived the fall, but also flourished from it. I was still in the same apartment, but the environment had changed. Plants filled the windows, books were piled in every corner and new paintings hung on the walls, a reflection of the desire for renewal that now guided his steps. Isadora had become a constant but non-invasive presence. It didn't take up anyone's space, it didn't require labels, it just offered light and true company. The bond between them grew without haste, without big declarations, just with the strength of two people who decided to walk together, even with scars. Ethan still thought about Clara sometimes, but not sadly. I thought of it like someone thinking about a remarkable book, one of those that changes us profoundly, but that you don't want to reread. He kept memories with respect, but without nostalgia. He understood that certain stories do not end with heartbreaks or wars, but with silence and maturity. And that there are goodbyes that, even though painful, are the greatest act of self-love anyone can have. However, fate, capricious as it is, was still preparing one last meeting. A year after the separation, while on a professional trip, Ethan was invited to speak at an international conference. He accepted naturally, already accustomed to the invitations, and only upon arriving at the venue discovered, by chance, Clara's name among the panelists at the same event. For a moment, he felt his heart speed up. Not out of desire, but out of respect for the impact she could still make. He thought about avoiding her, leaving discreetly after her participation, but decided against it. There was nothing to fear anymore. It was time to face the past with the serenity of someone who survived it. On the second day of the Congress, as he crossed the lobby towards the press room, he saw Clara sitting alone at one of the tables, looking at an already cold cup. She saw him too. Their eyes met. They both hesitated. But he was the one who approached. He sat down without saying anything. She smiled tenderly and said she didn't expect to see him there. He replied lightly that the world was too small for permanent escape. They said little. No questions about what could have been, no unnecessary memories. Just observations. Clara said she was fine, that the work was intense but rewarding. Ethan mentioned the new phase, the book he was writing about corporate ethics and human relationships, a mix of experience and study. They laughed at the ironies of fate. And then came silence. Not an awkward silence, but the kind of pause that precedes simple truths. Clara looked at him with moist but firm eyes and said that she knew she had lost much more than she realized. That not a single day went by without thinking about what it would have been like if I had made different choices. Ethan smiled, serenely, and replied that she hadn't lost, she had learned. And that perhaps this was the greatest gift they could both take away from everything. They stood up and exchanged a long, sincere hug, one that seals not return, but liberation. And then they followed opposite paths, each carrying a piece of the history that formed them, but no longer defined them. A few months later, Ethan released his book. The project became a success among readers from different areas, especially due to its human and vulnerable approach. It was a fictional account, but with clear traces of his own experience, and this deeply touched those who read it. I received letters, emails, invitations for interviews. He felt useful, heard, understood by people he had never met. Isadora was always close by, discreetly supporting, participating in the lectures, thrilled with each new chapter. She didn't ask for promises, she didn't demand feelings, she just offered presence. And it was like that, on a quiet autumn afternoon, that Ethan understood that he could love again, not like before, but in a freer, less idealized way. He loved Isadora not because she filled Clara's empty spaces, but because she helped him see himself with different eyes. And that was more than enough. Clara, in turn, began teaching at universities, mentoring young leaders and professionals in training. His experience, marked by mistakes and redemption, became a bridge to teach ethics and humanity within the business environment. He had a stable, respected, admired routine. But there were nights when, looking in the mirror, she remembered who she was with Ethan. And even though the pain had already faded, there was still a trace of melancholy. Not as guilt, but as memory. A reminder of how expensive the truth is when it is delayed. How much silence sometimes destroys more than the action itself. In the end, life took its course. Not with decorated happy endings, but with real endings. Clara continued with dignity, paying the price for what she chose and transforming her guilt into purpose. Ethan flourished in pain, rebuilt himself and found love again without needing to forget the past. Isadora appeared like a light breath, proving that, even after a fall, it is possible to get back up without rushing. And so, each one had the end they deserved, not a punishment, not a reward, but a consequence. A fair and human outcome, built on the choices they made when everything was about to fall apart. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, what did you think of this story? What part moved you the most? Do you think Ethan made the right choice? And Clara, did she deserve a new chance? I really want to know your opinion, and if you like intense stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next ones. Here, you will hear strong, realistic and exciting plots that show how our choices define our destinies, and never forget, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. The stories here are fictional, but the feelings are real. And the moral is clear: betrayal, no matter how seductive it may seem, always exacts a high price. Until the next story.